Hard work was never the game. It was the distraction that kept you from finding the actual one. Most people spend their entire lives believing that effort, applied consistently, eventually converts into wealth. It does not. If it did, the hardest working people on earth would also be the richest. They are not even close. There are exactly 3 games being played beneath the surface of every fortune ever built. Most people never learn they exist. They spend decades competing in a game with no real prize, while a handful of others quietly play 3 completely different ones. Tonight you learn all 3. Not theory, not motivation. The actual mechanics of how wealth moves from the many to the few, and the precise moves required to stop being on the losing side of that transfer. Let us begin. Game 1, Ownership versus Labor. Here is the trap almost everyone is born into without ever being told it is a trap. You trade your hours for money. You wake up, you work, you get paid for the specific block of time you exchanged. Stop showing up, the payment stops instantly and completely. This feels normal because it is the only game most people are ever shown. But look closely at how actual fortunes get built, and you will notice something uncomfortable. The wealthy rarely get rich from labor. They get rich from ownership. A business that operates whether or not the owner is physically present. A piece of intellectual property that earns every time someone uses it. A software system that processes a transaction at 3 in the morning while its creator sleeps. Ownership is not just having more money than labor produces. It is a completely different category of income, one that does not require your continued physical presence to keep functioning. This is the first and most important shift any person serious about wealth has to make. Stop asking, how can I earn more from my hours? Start asking, what can I build that earns without my hours at all? The laborer trades time for money, 1 unit at a time, forever, with no compounding. The owner builds something once, and that one thing keeps generating value long after the initial effort that created it. This does not mean stop working. It means stop confusing working hard with building wealth. They are not the same activity, even though they often look identical from the outside in the early years. Every hour you spend purely trading time for money is an hour not spent building something that could eventually replace the need for that trade entirely. The goal is not to escape work. The goal is to stop being merely a participant inside someone else's system and start owning a system of your own, however small it begins. Game 2, Leverage versus Saving. Saving money feels responsible, and to a point it is. But saving alone has never built significant wealth for anyone, in any era, anywhere. Here is the uncomfortable math nobody explains clearly. Inflation is not a rare event. It is a constant, quiet tax on every dollar sitting still. Money that simply sits and waits is money that is slowly losing value while you are not watching. The wealthy understand this instinctively, even when they cannot articulate the mechanism precisely. So instead of relying primarily on saving, they rely on leverage. Leverage is simply the use of resources beyond your own personal effort to multiply results. Other people's money, other people's time, technology that scales without additional labor, media and distribution that reaches thousands of people through the same effort it takes to reach one. This is where the conversation gets dangerous, because leverage has 2 faces, and most people only learn to recognize one of them. Good leverage builds assets. A loan used to acquire a property that generates income. Capital invested into a system that produces returns greater than the cost of the capital itself. Time invested into building something that multiplies the value of future hours. Bad leverage finances consumption. Debt used to buy things that lose value the moment you acquire them. Borrowed money spent on appearance instead of on anything that produces income in return. The difference between these two is not the existence of debt or risk. The difference is what the leverage is pointed at. Point leverage at consumption, and you accelerate your own decline. Point the exact same mechanism at ownership, and you accelerate your own ascent. This is why 2 people can use identical financial tools and end up in completely opposite positions a decade later. The tool was never the variable. The direction it was pointed in was. Game 3, Structural Advantage versus Fairness. Here is something almost nobody wants to admit out loud. The world does not reward effort proportionally. It rewards position. Two people can work with identical intensity, identical hours, identical dedication, and receive wildly different outcomes, because one of them is competing in a crowded, fair arena, while the other has quietly secured a structural advantage that has nothing to do with effort at all. A structural advantage is control of distribution, control of a network, control of an ecosystem that other people depend on to reach their own customers or opportunities. The wealthy are not, in most cases, simply working harder inside the same arena everyone else is fighting in. They are exiting the crowded arena entirely and finding, or building, a position where competition does not apply the same way. This is uncomfortable to hear, because it removes the comforting idea that the world is a meritocracy where pure effort always finds its proportional reward. It is not, and pretending otherwise keeps people competing in arenas that were never designed to reward them fairly in the first place. The strategic question is never, how do I work harder than my competitors inside this arena? It is, what position exists or could be built where the rules of this particular arena simply no longer apply to me. That might mean owning the distribution channel instead of competing for attention within it. It might mean controlling a relationship or a network that others depend on. It might mean building a long-term system instead of chasing short-term transactions that have to be re-won every single time. Short-term transactions require you to win the same battle repeatedly, forever. Long-term systems, once built correctly, win battles on your behalf indefinitely, without requiring you to personally show up to each one. The execution, the double life. Knowing these three games changes nothing if you never actually play them. And here is the practical mechanism that allows an ordinary person with ordinary obligations to begin playing all three simultaneously. You operate in two separate lives at once. The first is your visible life, your job, your obligations, the income that currently pays your bills and keeps your immediate world functioning. This life does not disappear overnight, and pretending it can is how most people quit before any real progress happens. The second is your invisible life, the hours after the visible obligations are met, where you quietly build the asset, the skill, the system, the structural position, completely unseen by anyone who only knows you through your visible life. For a long time, the invisible life produces nothing that resembles success. No income, no recognition, no proof that any of it is working. This is exactly the period where almost everyone quits. Not because the strategy is wrong, because the timeline between starting the invisible life and that invisible life producing visible results is longer than most people are prepared to tolerate without external validation. The people who eventually escape the labor trap are not the ones with the best ideas or the most talent. They are the ones who kept building the invisible life consistently long enough, while the visible life continued funding their existence in the meantime. Eventually, and this transition happens more suddenly than people expect, once it finally arrives, the invisible life becomes strong enough to detach your income from your direct labor entirely. That is the moment everything changes. Not because you suddenly became smarter or luckier, because you finally finished building the thing you started building in silence, years before anyone else noticed. The final truth, financial sovereignty. Here is what almost nobody tells you about the actual destination of all of this. The prize was never the money. Money is simply the byproduct of correctly playing these three games long enough for the structure to mature. The actual prize is sovereignty, the ability to direct your own life on your own terms, according to your own priorities, without needing permission, without needing approval, without your independence depending on someone else's decision about your continued employment. That is what ownership, properly built, actually buys you. Not luxury, not status. The complete removal of the standard labor for income model as the only mechanism funding your existence. Most people will never play any of these three games consciously. They will compete their entire lives in an arena built to reward labor proportionally to almost nobody, while believing sincerely that working harder is the entire solution. You now know otherwise. The three games have always been available. They were never hidden in some inaccessible elite circle. They were simply never taught, because the people who understood them had no reason to teach the rest of the arena how to stop competing inside it. Now you know. What you build with that knowledge is entirely up to you.